I talked recently about division versus distraction and how that impacts leadership. One of the things that I really want to dig into just a little bit more on that is a philosophy that all leaders know to some degree, and they know it to be true, but they don't really want to deal with it. And that is, even in the 4 pillars of mastery that Christian Simpson is leading us through right now, the idea of working on the owner before the business. Others would say, John Maxwell has, Elizabeth McCormick has, lead yourself first. That's the hardest part. The concept of leading ourselves before we start trying to put our ideas on someone else, before we take the policies, the processes, even the leadership understandings and try to export them, whether it's to our team or to another company or to a client or to another nation, we've got to make sure that those ideas work on us first. And I've got some quotes for you from politicians of days gone by that I think are a little bit revealing when it comes to how does a policy work in me before I take it somewhere else. Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast, 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And one of the concepts that really challenges leaders across the board, leaders of every level, is the idea that whether I get some credentials or I get someone else who acknowledges my leadership skills or my leadership abilities, once I've gotten the moniker, once I have, whether it's a doctorate's degree or a master's degree or a certificate or a training label, whatever it is, once I have that, then everything that comes out of my mouth is a good idea. Once I've lived through some of these experiences, then I can basically dictate these policies and everybody has to adhere to them, well, because, I have the degree. And the challenge for many people from a leadership standpoint and someone being led, the follower, the team, however you want to put that, the employee, is the idea that some people have what we would call book smarts and some people have what we would call street smarts. Well, the book smarts would say, I've studied this, I've researched this, I've been through this, and the street smarts would say, well, I haven't necessarily studied it, but I've tried it, and it either worked or it didn't. When it comes to working on cars, which I've done off and on and as an amateur and a tinkerer since I was 9 or 10 years old, helping my stepdad and his father, and I've taught my kids a lot about what they know, but both of my sons now are working as professional mechanics. And there are things that they do that are over my head, things that I haven't done yet. I have never tackled, one time have tackled a disc or a drum brake job. I don't like them. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of tiny pieces. And the first one I did was in the driveway at someone else's house in the grass. And when the brake pieces came apart, it was a disaster trying to find all the little pieces to put it back together. What should have been a 45-minute job took me about 3 hours. Now, when you got the right tools and you got the right training, that job isn't nearly as hard. But it's about understanding the process. It's about understanding all the moving pieces. It's about understanding how you're supposed to do it. So there's the experience and then there's the training. But then I also have an uncle who all of my life, he has been a mechanic. And he's the kind of guy that, whether he's got, significant training in an area or not, he's actually done it before. And he might tell you straight up, look, this is what the book says. But I'm just telling you, the book is wrong. The book is written to create more time so that people who get paid by the book, they get more money. It's not that that's the best way to do it, and it's certainly not the easiest way to do it. It's the way they've described for you to do it, prescribed for you to do it, because it generates revenue and opportunity for the company. Now that to me is, it's not good leadership. So if there's a process in your leadership that says, we're going to go by the book because the book creates opportunity or income or something of that nature, it's not the best way. It's not the only way. It's not the shortest way. It's not the fastest way. It's not the cheapest way. It's just the way that generates more profit for us. I have a problem with that. And I think as leaders, we should be looking for the ways to do things, the processes, the concepts, especially the ones that we export, which are the fastest way to the solution, the most viable way to the solution, and the most productive, effective, cost-effective, and efficient ways to the solution. But that's not what we see From individuals to governments, we see a lot of people who have a very specific way of accomplishing things, and it's almost as if the process of leading is intentionally muddied. It intentionally creates more steps. It intentionally creates more opportunity for the leader to be in more control, and intentionally creates more obstacles for those who are following to get the task done. Well, let me just give you an example, and this seems like a remote example, but I want to share with you just a couple of quotes. So this first one, and this is from my little book called The Quotable Politician. It says, "We are not afraid to entrust the American people with unpleasant facts, foreign ideas, alien philosophies, and competitive values. For a nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people." That was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th U.S. president, 1917 to 1963 is when he lived. You might remember he was assassinated in 1963, November. The American temptation is to believe that foreign policy is a subdivision of psychiatry. I'll let that one sink in for a minute, because what we're really saying in that is that we're looking at the idea that the concepts that we export are a way of controlling or manipulating the mind, whether it's locally or it's abroad, that foreign policy is a way of getting people to do what we want done. And that, well, for lack of a better term, is manipulation, it's coercion, it's what might be considered corruption in some places. That was said by Robert F. Kennedy, former U.S. Attorney General and Democratic Senator from New York, who lived 1925 to 1968. I believe also was his life was cut short. "No foreign policy, no matter how ingenious, has any chance of success if it is born in the minds of a few and carried in the minds of none, or carried in the hearts of none, excuse me. No foreign policy, no matter how ingenious, has any chance of success if it is born in the minds of few and carried in the hearts of none." That's Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary, 1923, and as of the writing of this book, still alive. I don't know if he has since passed. But here's kind of the clincher. Again, my whole concept today is talking about the idea that leaders need to master what it is that they do before they try to export it. They need to be able to do the functions, follow the process, see the procedure all the way through, see the results, and mimic those results. They need to be able to do it more than once. It's not just what I read in the book or saw somebody do one time, but I've actually been able to do this and successfully do it more than once. Whether it's helping someone else to do it or doing it myself more than once, I've actually been able to see this work. Now here's an interesting quote along that same concept. "Sincere diplomacy is no more possible than dry water or wooden iron." Sincere diplomacy is no more possible than dry water or wooden iron. Joseph Stalin, Soviet dictator, 1879 to 1953. Now, what does that have to do with leadership? If your philosophy is that you cannot really negotiate with people, that foreign policy is a matter of subversive technique that causes a form of psychological or psychiatric adjustment that causes people to simply do what you told them to because you have so much leverage over them, then there really is no negotiation there, right? It's a matter of saying, you're going to do what I told you to because, well, I've got the power to make sure that you do. And see, that's not leadership, that's tyranny. And I don't care if you're talking about a parent in the home, or you're talking about a leader in a business, or a leader on a team, or you're talking about a government leader. If the only way that you have to get your ideas adopted by the people around you is to terrorize them, to intimidate them, to not give them, because you don't trust them with the facts and the details, to not give them all the truth, not give them all the details, but to simply modify what you tell them enough to manipulate their behavior, well, that's not leadership, that's tyranny. And I don't think the world needs any more of that. The world needs to be able to have all the facts, make all the decisions, and see that you've demonstrated, that you've modeled, that you can mimic the same process over and over again and get the same or a very similar outcome, that your idea has legs and holds water. There are a whole lot of ideas, a whole lot of concepts, book smarts only, that have never actually been applied, that have failed every time they have been applied because different people have tried them and they didn't work. They read it out of the book and said, that sounds great, but taking it from paper to process to practice doesn't work with people. There are a lot of leadership concepts that are like that. And then there are a lot of leadership concepts that have come up along the way where people go, well, how would you define that? Well, it's not really definable. There's no written definition of it. There's no description of how I went about X, Y, Z, except historically to look back and go, well, this is what I did and this is how it worked. A good example of that is this book right here. The 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. I wrote this book out of my own experience in overcoming addiction. Now, there are people who've read it who are theologians. There are people who've read it who are deep in psychology. There are people who've read it who are deep in leadership, and they go, there's some really good practices in there. Where'd you get those ideas? And I'm like, I don't know. I just lived them. I lived through them and then tried to articulate them when I was done. And people have used the book and said, it worked for me too. And people that I've coached and mentored said, it's actually pretty good stuff. Overcoming addiction, that's a whole new process. I've never seen it put like that. Now, I'm not saying that to brag on myself. I'm saying that to say, if you've got a leadership idea, again, at an individual level, at a team level, at an organizational level, at a national level, as an international level, if you've got an idea for a leadership concept that you've pulled out of a book, but it's never been practiced, or that you've practiced, but nobody's ever really systematized it or put it into a process to say, okay, well, it worked for you, but will it work for others? It's worthwhile to document that process, to ask yourself, if I take it straight out of the book, will it function for everyone the same way that whoever wrote it down said it would? And if I have just practiced it myself and then practiced it more than once for other people, is it duplicable? Is it something that I can annotate? Is it something that I could articulate for other people to adopt? And I think somewhere between the balance of those two, the stuff that's been written down that said this is a great philosophy and it's been practiced and it was successful, and those that say, well, nobody's ever really thought about it like this, but we tried it and it works. I think where the two of those come together, you have powerful, successful leadership because it works first in the individual before it's adopted at a global or a national or an organizational level. If you've got a leadership concept and the only concept that you have is based on what came out of a book and no one's ever tried it, I challenge you to try it in your own life before you try to take it to the rest of the world. I challenge you to apply the principles, apply the rules, apply the processes, apply the systems, and see if they work. And if they work for you, and you can adopt them and mimic them and get the same results more than once, then share them with the world. And if not, go back to the drawing board. Maybe take those ideas and merge them together with your own experiences and come up with something entirely different. Capitalism was a brand new idea 250 years ago. So far, it has created more wealth, brought more people out of poverty, created more opportunity, created more liberty, created more independence than any other social or government structure on the face of the earth. Look it up if you think I'm crazy. But it was a brand new idea less than 300 years ago. Somebody had to try it. And now that we have, we see that free market, well, it's got its issues, but it works. Capitalism, it's got its issues, but it works. Maybe we can find ways to tweak and perfect that, but try it first. Apply it to a smaller segment like yourself, and then take it globally. I'm just saying, as a leader, we have an imperative to ensure that what we export, again, to our family, to our team, to our organization, to our county, our community, our nation, or the world. As leaders, we have an obligation to test it out first, test it on ourselves, lead ourselves first, and then try to export the ideas. If we're not willing to do that, then we probably don't really believe in the idea. We just strongly desire the results that we think it will offer, even though nobody's ever seen it. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.